Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start, I want you to sit with one uncomfortable idea, because the whole story turns on it. We are trained to trust paperwork. A signed form, a stamped approval, a badge on a lanyard, a printed sign on a door. When those things are present, our brains stop asking questions, and a certain kind of criminal knows that better than we do. They do not hide in the dark. They hide inside a filing cabinet. Today's story is about a father who used to work inside that filing cabinet. He knew exactly how a clean-looking document gets made, because years earlier he refused to make one, and it cost him everything. So when a police officer called him one evening and said the words, "Sir, your daughter is safe now," and he had never called the police in his life, he did not scream, and he did not fall apart. He asked the only question that mattered: safe from what? What he learned on the other end of that silence is going to make your stomach turn, and then it is going to make you proud, because the smallest person in this story is the one who kept a record when every adult around her did not. There is also a lesson buried in here about how the systems that are supposed to protect children actually work, and where the gap is, and I promise you will look at a signed consent form differently after tonight. Stay to the end, because the last 3 minutes of this thing happened in a courtroom, and they were only 3 minutes long. Ivor Kaminsky's day started at 4 in the morning, and it started the same way every day, with 3 things: a number, a temperature, a signature. That was the whole religion of his job. He drove a white cargo van with a refrigeration unit bolted behind the cab, and the side of it said, Northline Medical Logistics, in letters so plain they were almost apologetic. In the back, strapped into foam cradles, were the kinds of boxes people never think about. Investigational drug product moving from a distribution hub to a research clinic. Frozen plasma moving from a research clinic to a central laboratory. Tissue in a nitrogen shipper that hissed when you got close to it. None of it looked like anything. All of it was worth more than the van. Every box carried a number. Every box carried a temperature logger, a little plastic stick that recorded the internal environment once a minute and would not stop recording until somebody downloaded it. And every box carried a signature at each end, a human being putting their name on a line and saying, "This is what I received, at this hour, in this condition." Ivor used to say it out loud to himself when he was tired. Number, temperature, signature. If one of them lies, all 3 are lying. He was 38. He had a body that had gotten strong in an unglamorous way, from lifting shippers all day and sleeping badly, and he had a face that people underestimated, which was fine with him. He had been underestimated professionally for 5 years. Before Northline, he had been a clinical research coordinator, which is not a glamorous job either, but it is the job where the truth of a drug trial actually lives. The coordinator is the one who sits with the subject, takes the vitals, records the time points, writes the source notes, and signs them. Everything a sponsor company believes about a drug traces back to some tired person with a clipboard writing down what really happened at 9:40 in the evening. 5 years earlier, at a site called Cortland Clinical Partners, Ivor had been asked to fix a source note. That was the word they used, fix. A 19-year-old named Jory Aldis had been enrolled in a Phase 1 study at Cortland while he was still inside the washout window of a study at a different site 50 miles away, which is the kind of thing that is supposed to be impossible and happens constantly, because there is no national registry of human beings who sell their bloodstreams for $800 a weekend. Jory Aldis had a seizure on day 4. He died on day 6. And the site's medical director had leaned over Ivor's desk and explained, in a very patient voice, that the intake screening note simply needed a corrected date. Ivor had said no. Then he had said no again, in writing, to the sponsor, and to the Institutional Review Board, and to the state. Nothing happened to Cortland. Something happened to Ivor. He was terminated for cause, which is a phrase with a specific weight in that industry, and the reason listed was falsification of study records, which was precisely, perfectly backwards. It went into a sponsor investigator database that every clinical research organization in the country subscribes to. He applied to 41 positions in 18 months and got 2 interviews, both of which ended the moment somebody ran his name. So he learned to drive a van, and he found, to his own surprise, that he liked it. There was something clean about a job where the paperwork was the point, and nobody asked you to soften it. His daughter was named Hallie, and she was 7 years old, and she was the most literal human being he had ever met. Hallie counted things. Steps between the car and the front door, bites in an apple, the number of times a stranger said the word actually. She kept a black and white marble composition notebook that she called her worry list, which was not a diary and did not contain feelings. It contained facts that had bothered her. Ivor had bought her the notebook when the divorce started, on the advice of a counselor who had suggested she might want a place to put things, and Hallie had taken that instruction with an engineer's seriousness. Page 1, in a 7-year-old's careful block capitals, read, "Dad slept in the chair." 3 times. He had also given her a phone. It was his old one, 3 generations obsolete, with a hairline crack running diagonally across the screen like a river on a map. It had no SIM card, no plan, no number, no service. She used it as a camera, mostly, and to play a game about stacking blocks that did not need the internet. But on the day he gave it to her, he had sat on the edge of her bed and told her something he had learned from a paramedic at a loading dock in Denver. A dead phone can still call for help. Every cell phone sold in this country, active or not, plan or no plan, will connect to any tower it can find if you dial those 3 numbers. It cannot call me. It cannot call Mom. It can call them. She had turned it over in her hands and asked what happens then, and he had said, "Then somebody comes." Hallie had nodded once and written it down. The divorce had been the slow kind, not the explosive kind. Rowena had taken back her maiden name, Thrale, about 10 minutes after the papers were final, which Ivor had found more honest than cruel. She had moved 5 months ago into a building on the east side of Stannard called Larkmore Court, a 60-unit block of brick and cream stucco with a landscaped island in the parking lot and a sign that promised community living. She had moved in with a man named Nevin Lattimore, who was 41, who wore good shoes, and who described his job at dinner parties as helping people access medicine before it exists. The custody arrangement was ordinary, and it had worked, more or less. Ivor had Hallie Wednesday through Sunday. Rowena had her Monday and Tuesday nights. Tuesdays. For about a month, Hallie had been strange on Wednesdays. Not upset. Strange. She asked questions with the flat curiosity of a child working a math problem, and the questions did not belong to a 7-year-old. Is it stealing if you use somebody else's name for something? How long can a person sleep before it is too long? If a grown-up says a kid is fine, and the kid is not fine, who is right? Ivor had answered them carefully, the way you answer a child who is testing whether you will take her seriously, and he had written each one down in his own head, because he was the son of a man who wrote things down. He had asked her twice, gently, whether something was happening at her mother's. Both times she had said no in a way that meant she was answering a different question than the one he had asked. And then there was the phone thing. She had started calling it the Tuesday phone. Not the old phone, not the camera phone, the Tuesday phone. She carried it in the front pocket of her backpack, and she charged it every Monday night without being told, which was the only chore in the history of their household that she had ever performed voluntarily. On a Tuesday in October at 6:52 in the evening, Ivor was parked at the North Line yard, filling out a delivery exception form for a shipper that had arrived 1.1 degrees warm, when his phone rang with a number he did not recognize, and a young man's voice said, "Mr. Kaminsky, this is Officer Abram Ruff with the Stannard Police Department. I wanted to let you know your daughter is safe now." Ivor did not move. His pen was still on the form. "Safe from what?" he said. There was a silence on the line that went on long enough that Ivor could hear a radio in the background and somebody laughing about something ordinary. "Sir," the officer said, and his voice had changed, "who do you think has been calling us every Tuesday for a month?" Ivor was already walking. He did not remember standing up. He got into the van, which was against 3 separate company policies for personal use, and he pulled out of the yard with the exception form still on the passenger seat and his hand shaking so badly he had to grip the wheel with both. "Tell me," he said. "Do not hang up. Tell me while I drive." Larkmore Court was 11 minutes from the North Line yard, and Officer Abram Ruff talked for 9 of them. He talked the way young officers talk when they have realized halfway through a shift that they are standing in the middle of something much larger than the call they were dispatched to, and they are trying to sound like it is under control. There had been 12 calls, he said, over 4 weeks. Some of them to 911, some to the department's non-emergency line, which was interesting in itself, because a child who knows the difference between those two numbers is a child who has been thinking about it. Every single one had come in on a Tuesday. Every single one had come in between 8:40 and 9:20 in the evening. And every single one had come from a device with no subscriber. Ivar's hands went cold on the wheel. He knew exactly what that meant, because he had explained it to a 7-year-old on the edge of a bed. An unregistered handset, Ruff said. No callback number, no account, nothing to trace back. Dispatch gets those sometimes. Kids find an old phone in a drawer, they figure out it still dials, they call in a prank. It happens more than you would think. That is what the first 4 got logged as. What did she say? Ivar said. She never gave a name, sir. Not once. And I want you to understand, that is not what a prank sounds like. A prank hangs up and giggles. This was 30, 40 seconds every time, always the same structure, always whispering. And she was not calling about herself. What did she say? Ruff exhaled. She said, "There is a boy in the second room, and he will not wake up." Ivar ran a yellow light at Cottonwood and Fisher and did not notice it. The reason we are calling you tonight, Ruff continued, is a dispatcher named Lurleen Nunes. 31 years on the console. She pulled all 12 of them into one file on her own time, because she said the calls did not sound like a prank, they sounded like a shift. Same night, same hour, same script. She pushed for the wireless location data, the Phase 2 positioning, and she got a fix down to a building footprint on the east side. That would normally be a haystack, but the timing gave us the last piece. Tuesdays at 9. Larkmore Court, Ivar said. Yes, sir. We ran a welfare check tonight at 8:51, and I need to be honest with you about something before you get here. Say it. Ruff took a second. Nobody is hurt. Nothing is broken. There is no blood. There is nobody screaming. If you had told me what I was going to find in there tonight, I would have said that sounds like a doctor's office. But I have been doing this for 4 years, and I have never been this uncomfortable in a room in my life, and I do not have a single thing I can arrest anybody for. Ivar turned into Larkmore Court at 7:11 in the evening. There were 2 patrol cars parked at angles across the fire lane with their light bars turning, throwing blue and red across 60 units of brick and cream stucco. A small crowd of residents stood in the landscaped island in bathrobes and hoodies, holding phones, saying nothing. And there was a sign. The ground floor east wing of Larkmore Court, 3 units that had been knocked together during a renovation Ivar had never bothered to ask about, had a sign beside its double glass door. It was professionally printed on brushed aluminum, mounted at eye level, lit from above by 2 small warm bulbs. It said, Resident Wellness Suite, Community Health Screening, Arden Point Clinical Research. Ivar stood in the parking lot and read it 4 times, and with each reading he felt something in his chest reorganize itself into a shape he recognized from 5 years earlier. Arden Point. He had delivered to Arden Point. Not here, at their main site on Cottonwood Avenue, a low brick building with a good lobby and a plaque about pediatric innovation. He had carried boxes through that door for 2 years without ever once thinking about it, because it was a number, a temperature, and a signature, and it was somebody else's problem what happened after the signature. He went inside. The first thing that struck him was the smell, and the smell was correct. That was what made it obscene. It smelled like isopropyl alcohol and floor wax, and the faint plastic of a new blood pressure cuff, which is exactly what a clinic is supposed to smell like. The carpet in the entry had been replaced with medical-grade vinyl. The lighting had been changed to that flat, shadowless white. The 2 bedrooms of what had once been Unit 1E had cots in them. 4 cots to the larger room, 2 to the smaller. There were 3 children. They were between 5 and 11, and they were asleep, and they were wearing their own pajamas, which somehow made it much worse than if they had been in gowns. Each of them had a soft pediatric pulse oximeter clipped to a finger, glowing red through the skin. Each of them had a line running into the back of one hand, taped down with a butterfly of clear film. There was a rolling cart against the far wall with a locked drawer and, on top of it, an open plastic tray holding 6 glass vials with pale blue caps and a label Ivar read from 12 feet away because he had read 10,000 of them. Cadenzine, 5 milligrams per milliliter. Investigational use only, not for sale. Protocol Somnus P2. A woman in scrubs was standing between the cots with a tablet in her hands and an expression of tremendous, offended patience. Her badge said Ilsa Prokop, registered nurse. Officer Abram Ruff was standing near the window with his notebook out and his ears red. Another officer stood in the hall with a man in a quarter-zip sweater who was explaining something with his hands. The man in the quarter-zip was Nevin Lattimore, and Hallie was in the corridor. She was sitting on the vinyl floor with her back against the wall, in socks, in the dinosaur pajamas Ivor had bought her, with her knees up and her arms wrapped around them. In her right hand, held against her chest with both thumbs on the screen, was a black rectangle with a hairline crack running diagonally across the glass like a river on a map. She looked up and saw her father, and she did not cry, which broke something in him that crying would not have. She said, very quietly, "I only called about Ivo." Ivor went down on one knee in front of her. "Who is Ivo, sweetheart?" "He is in the second room," she said. "He is 11. He is the one who does not wake up. The others wake up, Dad. They are just sleepy and they go home. Ivo does not. Last time he did not wake up for a really long time, and I counted, and it was 72 minutes, and the nurse said that is normal for him." She turned the phone over in her hands. "I called about the boy," she said. "Not about me. I am okay. I just get the juice one." Behind him, Nevin Lattimore said, warmly, "Ivor, hey, this is a huge misunderstanding, and I am honestly relieved you are here, because you of all people are going to understand this." Ivor stood up. "What is a juice one?" he said. Nevin Lattimore had a good face. That was the thing about him, and Ivor had noticed it the first time, at a handoff in a grocery store parking lot. He had the kind of face that is designed to make you feel like the two of you have already agreed. He was tall, going gracefully gray at the temples, and he had the specific competence of a man who has learned that 90% of trouble can be dissolved by being the calmest person in the room. "Oral solution," he said, and he said it easily, like the answer was a relief to give. "Some of the kids take an oral formulation. It is flavored. The kids call it the juice one. Ivor, look at me. This is a screening study. It is approved by an institutional review board. We have the letter framed on that wall right there, and every single child in this suite has a signed parental consent form in a binder I will hand you personally in about 90 seconds. And my daughter has a line in her hand," Ivor said. "She does not," Nevin said. "Hallie is not dosed. Hallie has never been 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 dosed," which is 100% normal and 100% legal. Ivor looked past him at the nurse, Ilsa Prokop, who had stopped moving. He said, to the nurse, not to Nevin, "What is on the wristband?" "Excuse me," said the nurse. "The children are wearing wristbands, every one of them. I can see them from here." "What is printed on my daughters?" Nobody said anything. Ivor walked past Nevin Lattimore, and Nevin made the mistake of putting a hand on his arm. And Ivor looked at the hand until it came off, and then he crossed the corridor and crouched in front of his daughter again and took her left wrist very gently. She was wearing a soft white band with a printed label, the kind you get in a hospital, the kind Ivor had personally applied to 800 research subjects in his previous life. It did not say Halle Kaminsky. It said, Subject 0417, Thrale, H, Protocol Somnus P2, Visit 4. Ivor knelt there on a vinyl floor in an apartment building and read it 3 times. Visit 4 in a 6-visit pediatric protocol. It meant that whatever this was, it had happened 3 times before. And Subject 0417 was a number that belonged to somebody. Somewhere in a database in a building in New Jersey, there was a row that said Subject 0417 had presented for Visit 4, had been dosed at a specific time, had produced a specific set of vital signs and a specific volume of blood, and that row was going to be used to decide whether a sedative was safe to give to children. Rowena arrived at 7:26. She came in through the double glass doors at a fast walk with her coat open, and when she saw Ivor kneeling in the corridor holding their daughter's wrist, she did the thing that Ivor would think about for months afterward, on long drives, in the dark. She did not look at Hallie first. She looked at the binder on the counter. "What are you doing here?" she said. Officer Ruff started to explain about a welfare check, and Rowena talked over him, which was a mistake, and told Ivor that he had no right, that this was her custody night, that he was ambushing her at her home, and then she said the sentence that ended the marriage a second time, more thoroughly than any judge had. She said, "Nothing illegal happened here." Ivor stood up with Hallie's hand in his. "I know," he said. "That is what is terrifying." He got Hallie's shoes. He got her backpack. Officer Abram Ruff, who could not arrest anyone, who had a signed consent form for every child in that suite, who had an approval letter on the wall and a registered nurse on site, and a physician of record listed on a laminated card by the door, stood in the doorway and quietly did the only thing he could do, which was to write down every single thing he saw in a notebook, including the lot numbers on 6 vials of Catenzine, because a young officer's notes are a public record and paper cuts both ways. In the parking lot, under the turning lights, Ivor buckled his daughter into a cargo van that smelled like refrigerant, and she said, "Dad, am I in trouble for calling them?" "No, because I did it a lot. I know you did. 12 times. Hallie looked out the windshield at the brick and cream stucco, at the warm little bulbs over a brushed aluminum sign, and she said the sentence that Ivor Kaminsky would repeat, word for word, 14 months later, in a federal courtroom in Denver, to a jury of 12 adults who had spent their lives trusting paperwork. She said, "I kept calling because nobody ever came for Ivo. They only ever came for me." By Thursday afternoon, Ivor had learned the shape of the thing he was actually fighting, and it was not a clinic in an apartment building. It was a filing cabinet. He had done everything right and everything fast. Friday morning he was in the office of Perpetua Kittredge, a family law attorney in her 60s, with reading glasses on a chain and a courtroom voice she deployed like a tool she kept sharp. He gave her a written timeline, the photograph of the wristband, Officer Ruff's incident number, and a 2-page summary of what a Phase 2 pediatric protocol actually is, written in language a judge could read in 4 minutes. Perpetua read all of it twice and then took her glasses off. "This is the best documented emergency motion I have ever been handed by a client," she said, "and I want you to understand before we file it that we are probably going to lose." They filed an emergency motion to modify custody on Friday at 11. They were in front of Judge Tilde Ansari on Monday at 9. And they lost, mostly. Ivor had expected the fight to be about the children. It was not. It was about him. Rowena's response, filed by an attorney who had clearly been retained by somebody with more money than Rowena Thrale had ever had, ran to 31 pages and had exhibits. Exhibit A was a copy of a termination letter from Cortland Clinical Partners dated 5 years earlier, stating that Ivor Kaminsky had been separated for cause for falsification of study records. Exhibit B was a printout of an entry in a sponsor investigator database flagging him. Exhibit C was a series of emails he had sent 5 years ago at 2 and 3 in the morning to a state health department, an institutional review board, and a sponsor compliance line about a 19-year-old named Jory Aldis. There were 9 of them. Read out of context, arranged in a column, they looked exactly like what her attorney called them. A documented pattern of obsessive, unfounded allegations against medical institutions. Rowena's affidavit said that Ivor had never recovered from being fired, that he saw research fraud everywhere, that he had coached their daughter, over months, to be frightened of doctors, and that this had culminated in the child making a series of false emergency calls, which was itself a crime, and which Rowena was prepared to forgive as the product of her father's influence, rather than her own malice. There was a second affidavit from Dr. Rune Ostberg, a pediatrician with a practice on the North Side, who had examined Holly on Wednesday morning at Rowena's request. He found a healthy 7-year-old. He noted mild bruising inside the left elbow consistent with a routine blood draw. He noted that the mother reported the child had a blood draw as part of a community health screening for which she had provided written consent, and that this was, in his professional opinion, unremarkable. Ivor sat in a courtroom in Pullent County, and listened to a pediatrician's affidavit describe the bruise inside his daughter's elbow as unremarkable. Perpetua Kittredge fought well. She got Officer Ruff's report admitted. She got the wristband photograph admitted. She read the words Thrale, H, into the record, and asked the court to note that the child's legal surname is Kaminsky. The judge listened. Judge Tilde Ansari was not a fool, and she was not bought. She was something worse for Ivor's purposes. She was careful. "Mr. Kaminsky," she said, "I am not going to pretend that I like the picture I am being shown. I do not. But I am a family court judge, and what I have in front of me is a signed parental consent, an approved research protocol, a licensed registered nurse on site, a physician of record, and a well-child examination by an independent pediatrician finding no injury. What I do not have is a criminal charge, a regulatory finding, a licensing action, or a single expert telling me a crime occurred. If there is a crime here, it belongs to a prosecutor and a regulator, and if either of them acts, my door is open at any hour." She entered one order. Neither parent shall enroll the minor child in any clinical research study, screening program, or medical protocol without the prior written consent of both parents. That was it. That was the whole victory. A piece of paper telling a woman who had already signed a false wristband that she needed a co-signature. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Nevin Lattimore caught up with him by the elevators, and he had that face on, the one that had already agreed with you. "No hard feelings," he said. "Honestly, if I were you, I would have done the same thing." Ivor pressed the elevator button. "You know what the worst part of your old job was," Nevin said, conversationally. "I looked you up. Coordinator. 4 years, phase 1 and 2. So you know. The worst part is not the science. The science is fine. The worst part is that you were the one who had to look at a person and write down what happened to them. That is a terrible job for a man with a conscience. I am glad you got out." The elevator arrived. Ivor stepped in, turned around, and said the first thing he had said to Nevin Lattimore that was entirely true. "I did not get out," he said. "I got moved." He went back to work on Tuesday because he needed the job and because there was nowhere else to stand. And that afternoon, in the cab of a white cargo van, with a clipboard on his knee and a barcode scanner in his hand, Ivor Kaminsky stopped being a man fighting a custody case and started being what he had actually been trained to be. He started being a person who reads records. Here is the thing that nobody outside the industry understands about clinical research, and it is the thing that made Ivor Kaminsky dangerous. The drug does not travel alone. When a pharmaceutical sponsor ships an investigational product to a research site, the shipment is a legal object. It has a unique shipment identifier. It has a manifest listing every vial by lot and serial. It has a chain of custody form with a line for every human being who touches it. And it has a temperature logger, a single-use device that begins recording the instant it is sealed at the depot and does not stop until somebody at the receiving site plugs it into a computer and pulls the file. That file is the most honest document in medicine. It is a minute-by-minute record of reality, written by a machine that cannot be persuaded, flattered, or promoted. Ivor had spent 5 years driving those files around Colorado in the back of a refrigerated van, and it had never once occurred to him that he was carrying anything but boxes. Now he sat in the North Lanyard on a Tuesday afternoon with his route manifest on the clipboard, and he looked at it the way he used to look at a source document. Arden Point Clinical Research had 2 ship-to addresses. He had known that, in the way you know the shape of a doorknob you use every day. Address 1 was Arden Point's registered site, 1200 Cottonwood Avenue, the low brick building with the good lobby. Address 2 was listed in the Northline system as Arden Point Satellite 2, and the street address under it was a number on Larkmore Drive with a unit designation of 1E. He had delivered there. Not often, maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, always in the late afternoon, always signed for by a nurse or a coordinator who came out to the loading area by the dumpster enclosure. He had assumed it was an overflow storage location. Every site has one. He pulled up the delivery history on the handheld and scrolled. 22 deliveries to Larkmore 1E in 14 months. Every one of them on a Monday or a Tuesday. Ivor sat very still in the cab of the van with the engine off, and the cold went through him in a slow wave, because he had just understood something that made him complicit. He had been carrying it, For 14 months, a man who had lost his entire career for refusing to falsify a research record had been the one driving the drug to the room. Kester Bly was the Northline dispatcher, a heavy, cheerful man of 50 who ran the route board like a chess problem and who had, over 5 years, become the closest thing Ivor had to a friend at work. Ivor asked him one question in the little glass office off the dock. The loggers. What happens to the files? Every logger we hand off, Kester said. The file gets pulled at the dock and archived on the server for 7 years. Regulatory. If a sponsor ever comes after us over a temperature excursion, we have to prove the excursion happened after our custody ended. It is the whole reason this company still exists. 7 years, Ivor said. 7 years. Why? Ivor did not tell him. Not that day. What he did instead was go home and open a spreadsheet and start building the only thing he knew how to build. A ledger, shipment identifier, ship date, destination, lot numbers, vial serials, logger file, and the name and the signature that came back on the chain of custody form. He had access to 7 years of it because he was a driver and it was his own route history, and no one had thought to take it away from him because no one had ever thought of a driver as a person who might read. The name on the signature line at Larkmore 1E on 19 of the 22 deliveries was Quiroz, M. He remembered her. 24 maybe. Dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. A badge on a retractable reel that she was always fidgeting with. She came out to the dock in scrubs and signed with the scanner stylus in a fast, illegible slash, and she never made eye contact, and Ivor had assumed she was rude. He thought about it for a while and decided she was not rude. She was a person who did not want to be looked at. That week, Ivor started paying attention to Arden Point the way he had once paid attention to a Phase 1 protocol, which is to say completely, in the margins of a full-time job, at 2 in the morning, with coffee. Arden Point had been founded 11 years earlier by Dr. Lamont Ossery, a pediatric anesthesiologist who had stopped practicing anesthesia in a hospital and started practicing it in a business. 58. Silver-haired. A keynote every year at a regional conference. Photographed on his own website in front of a wall of children's artwork under the caption, "We believe the smallest patients deserve the most careful science." The chief operating officer was his older brother Stellan Ossery, who had no medical training at all, and whose previous company had been a chain of urgent care clinics sold in a hurry in another state. And Nevin Lattimore's actual title was Director of Patient Recruitment, which at an honest site means health fairs and advertisements. At a dishonest site, it means something else. Hallie came back to him on Wednesday, and on Wednesday night after she was asleep, Ivor did something he was not proud of and would have to explain later to a federal agent. He read her worry list. The marble notebook was in the front pocket of her backpack, next to the Tuesday phone. He sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light off and turned the pages. For the first 30 pages, it was what it had always been. Dad slept in the chair 3 times. Mom says the apartment is temporary, but she bought a couch. MRS Delgado said actually 9 times. And then, starting on a page dated in September, in a child's rendering of the date, the notebook changed. Tuesday, downstairs room, 4 kids, me and Ivo and 2 little ones. They gave me the juice. It tastes like pink. Ivo got the arm one. I slept 40 minutes. Ivo slept 72 minutes. Tuesday, 5 kids. The girl with the braids cried and they said she is done. Nurse said my name is a different name here. She said it is for the computer. I asked if that is stealing. She said no, it is paperwork. Tuesday, Ivo did not wake up for a long time. I counted 72. I called the number. Nobody came. Tuesday, I called again. Nobody came. Tuesday, I called the other number Dad showed me. A lady answered and she said, "Sweetheart, is this a joke?" Ivor Kaminsky sat in his kitchen in the dark and put his hand over his mouth and did not make a sound because his daughter was asleep down the hall. 12 entries, 12 Tuesdays. He got up and went to the printer where his ledger was sitting. 12 pages of shipment identifiers and lot numbers and signature lines, and he laid the 2 documents side by side on the table. A 7-year-old's block capitals in a composition notebook. A courier's chain of custody archive. The same 12 Tuesdays. The dispatcher's name was Lurleen Nunes, and she agreed to meet him at a diner on Route 9 at 6 in the morning, which is the hour when night shift people eat dinner. She was 62 years old, and she had the posture of somebody who has sat in the same chair for 3 decades. She ordered eggs and did not touch them. "I am going to say something to you first," she said, "before you say anything to me. I have taken 400,000 calls. I am not being poetic. That is roughly the number. And there are maybe 9 of them I still hear. Your daughter is one of the 9. She put a manila envelope on the table. "That is not evidence," she said. "That is a printout that I made for myself, on my own time, off the public side of the computer-aided dispatch system, and everything in it is available to you or to any citizen through a records request that will take you 11 weeks. I am giving you 11 weeks. Ivor opened it in the parking lot afterward and read all 12. They were short. Dispatch transcripts always are. Call 4. Duration 31 seconds. Caller, juvenile female, whispering. Caller, there is a boy in the second room and he will not wake up. Dispatch, okay honey, where are you? What is your address? Caller, I cannot say the address. Dispatch, why can you not say the address, sweetheart? Caller, because then they will know it is me and they will not let me come back on Tuesday. Dispatch, why do you want to come back? Caller, because somebody has to count how long he sleeps. Ivor sat in the van outside a diner on Route 9 and cried for the first time in 4 years, and then he wiped his face with the heel of his hand, and then he drove to work, and then he began the part of this story where he stopped being a victim. He found Ivo Petrasek in 3 days, and he found him the way you find anyone, which is by asking a person who has no reason to lie. The Larkmore Court maintenance man knew a boy named Ivo in 4C, 11, quiet, always on the stairs with a handheld game. His mother was Lucia Petrasek. She worked 2 jobs and she was, in the maintenance man's phrase, having a hard couple of years. Ivor did not ambush her. He waited until Saturday morning and knocked on the door of 4C with a bag of groceries he did not pretend was anything other than a bribe. Lucia Petrasek was 33 and looked 45, and when Ivor said the words Ardenpoint and Tuesday, she leaned her forehead against the edge of the door and started to cry in the exhausted way of a woman who has been waiting a long time for somebody to ask. They pay $600, she said. Per completed visit. 600. Do you know what that is? That is the electric and the car payment. And they are so nice about it. There is a coordinator who calls you and reminds you, and if you are short, she will advance you against the next one. She showed him a shoebox. Enrollment cards. 7 studies in 2 years, for herself and for Ivo. An allergy study. A sleep study. 2 vaccine studies. A pain study she could not remember the details of. Ardenpoint on 4 of them. A different site in Denver on 2. One from a company that no longer existed. He is not supposed to be in 2 at once, Ivor said quietly. Ever. There is a washout period. It is the most basic rule there is. Lucia Petrasek looked at him with a kind of dull horror. Nobody ever asked me, she said. Not one time in 2 years did anybody ask me if he was in another one. Ivor sat down on the arm of her sofa because his legs had stopped being reliable. That is the whole crime, he thought. That is the entire architecture of it. There is no national registry. Nobody checks. The site that gets paid per subject is the same site that verifies the subject. The fox is not guarding the henhouse. The fox is filling out the henhouse census. Ivo came out of the bedroom then, 11 years old, tall for it, holding a handheld game console, and he had the gray under his eyes that Ivor had seen in Phase 1 subjects at the end of a long confinement. Are you Hallie's dad? The boy said. Yeah. She counts, Ivo said. Did you know that? She counts how long I am out. She told me the number every time. Nobody else ever told me the number. Then Ardenpoint stopped being polite. It happened on a Thursday, in the order that these things always happen, which is fast and from 3 directions at once. Direction 1. A letter from a law firm in Denver arrived at Ivor's apartment by certified mail. It informed him that he was in possession of confidential proprietary information belonging to Ardenpoint Clinical Research, that his continued contact with Ardenpoint research participants constituted tortious interference and potentially a violation of federal privacy law, and that Ardenpoint would seek injunctive relief and damages. Direction 2. Northline Medical Logistics received a formal client complaint alleging that one of its drivers had misused chain of custody records and had made unauthorized contact with a client's patients. Ivor was suspended with pay pending review. His handheld was collected. His system credentials were disabled at 4:15 in the afternoon. Direction 3. And this was the one that was meant to end him. Rowena Thrale filed an emergency motion to suspend Ivor's parenting time entirely, alleging that he had coached the minor child into making 12 false emergency calls, that this constituted both emotional abuse and a criminal misuse of the emergency system, and that the child needed to be protected from him during the pendency of an investigation. Judge Tilda Ansary, who was careful, did the careful thing. She ordered a temporary suspension of overnight visitation pending an evaluation. Ivor lost his daughter for 11 days. He would say later that those 11 days were the most useful of his life, and he would say it without any warmth at all. Because on day 2, sitting on the floor of an apartment with a made bed in an empty room down the hall, he understood something. He did not need his credentials. He was not the record. He had never been the record. The record sat on a server in a building on the north side of Stannard, backed up nightly, retained for 7 years by federal regulation, and it did not care whether Ivor Kaminsky still had a badge. He did not need access. He needed somebody with a subpoena, or somebody with an audit right. And there were exactly 2 categories of people on Earth who could walk into Ardenpoint Clinical Research and demand to see everything, on 24 hours' notice, without asking a judge for permission. The company whose drug it was, and the federal agency that regulates them both. Ivor Kaminsky spent 11 days without his daughter, and he used them to learn a business he already knew, from the outside, as an enemy. He started with the money, because the money is always the map. A sponsor does not pay a research site a salary. It pays per subject and per completed visit, with milestone payments attached to enrollment targets and to database lock, plus a retention bonus if dropout stays under a threshold. And there it was, in the second sentence of the sponsor's own investor presentation, which was public, because everything is public if you are willing to read boring things. Verint Pharmaceuticals had told its investors that the pediatric arm of the Somnus P2 program was fully enrolled and on track for database lock in the first quarter, unlocking a milestone payment of $11 million from a licensing partner. Ivor read that sentence and understood the entire crime in about 4 seconds, the way you understand a magic trick the instant somebody shows you the mirror. Ardenpoint had not enrolled 40 children. Ardenpoint had enrolled some number of children, and then those children had started dropping out because they were being given a sedative overnight, 6 times, and their parents had watched them come home gray. Dropout in a pediatric sedation study is not a surprise. It is the most predictable event in the world. But dropout is death to a site like Ardenpoint. Every child who leaves takes their remaining visits with them. Every child who leaves pushes the retention rate past the threshold and kills the bonus. Enough children leave, and the sponsor pulls the site, audits the data, and the $11 million does not happen at all. So Ardenpoint had solved a dropout problem the way a certain kind of business solves every problem. They had kept the numbers and replaced the children. Subject 0417 had dropped out in August. Subject 0417 still had 3 visits owed to a database in New Jersey. So on a Tuesday night in September, in a converted apartment on the ground floor of the building where his mother lived, a 7-year-old girl named Hallie Kaminsky had been given a wristband with somebody else's identity on it, and a flavored oral solution she called the Juice One, and her heart rate and her oxygen saturation and her blood had been recorded as the heart rate and oxygen saturation and blood of subject 0417. The dataset stayed clean, the retention rate stayed beautiful, the invoices stayed plausible, and a sedative was being evaluated for use in children on the basis of a spreadsheet with a lie in every 4th row. That was the fraud. Ivor could prove the shape of it. What he could not yet prove was the thing that turned a white-collar case into the other kind. He found that on a Sunday, in a garage on the west side of Stannard, from a machinist named Ozias Kostas. Ivor found him through an obituary, which is a terrible way to find anyone. He had been searching for pediatric deaths in Pallant County going back 3 years, and there was one that stopped him, 14 months old in the archive, 5 years old in life. Ellen Costas, age 5, died at home in her sleep. Cardiac event. No autopsy requested by the family. Ozias Costas was a big, slow-moving man in his 40s, with forearms like bridge cable and a garage that was cleaner than most operating rooms. He listened to Ivor for 20 minutes without interrupting, and when Ivor finished, he went to a shelf and took down a plastic storage tub and set it on the workbench and opened it. Inside was a child's cardigan, folded, a pair of shoes, a drawing, a pharmacy bag with a receipt in it, and a soft white wristband with a printed label, cut off at the clasp. Ivor picked it up with 2 fingers. Subject 0409, Somnus P2, Visit 5. I asked what the number meant, Ozias said. At the time, they said it was for the computer. Ivor put the band down very carefully, because his hands were not steady, and because it was evidence, and because it was a child's. Was she in the study? He asked. Officially, said Ozias Costas. No, she was not. I know that because after she died I called the number on the paperwork and a woman told me there was no participant by that name and I must be confused. I called 4 times. The 4th time a man got on the phone and told me that if I kept harassing his staff he would have me charged. And you stopped, Ivor said. I am a machinist, Ozias said. I make parts for hydraulic presses. What am I going to do to a doctor? He looked at the tub. You are going to tell me she should have had an autopsy, he said. Ivor Kaminsky, who had spent 5 years being told he was obsessive, said the truest and cruelest sentence available. Yes, he said, and so is every other child in that room, eventually, unless somebody makes it stop this month. He drove home and he laid it all out on the kitchen table, all of it at once, for the first time. The worry list, the dispatch transcripts, the chain of custody ledger, Lucia Petrosek's shoebox of enrollment cards, the investor presentation, 2 wristbands, 1 photographed on his daughter's arm and 1 cut off a dead girl's. And he understood, finally, why Rowena had done it, which was the question that had been eating him from the inside since the night in the corridor. It was not passion. It was not even really Nevin Lattimore. It was $600 a visit, and a coordinator stipend on top of it, and a man with a good face who told her she was on staff, that she was part of something, that she was helping children get access to medicine before it exists. Rowena Thrale had been drowning in the small, unglamorous debt that eats American adults alive, and somebody had handed her away to be both solvent and important, and all it cost was signing a form with her own maiden initial on it. She had known. That was the part Ivor could not soften, and did not try to. Nobody signs their child in under a false surname by accident. There is no version of that where you have not understood. He sat with his hatred of her for about an hour. And then, because he was his father's son, and because rage is a flare and a record is a current, he set it down and looked at her the way he would look at a shipment with a broken seal. She was the weakest joint in the structure. She was the one who would break first, and loudest, and take everything down with her, which meant the smartest thing he could possibly do was not touch her at all. At 11:40 that night he wrote 1 email. Not to Cortland, not to a journalist, not to Rowena. He wrote to the Office of Criminal Investigations of the Food and Drug Administration, which is a real thing that most people have never heard of, staffed by federal agents with badges and guns whose entire job is the criminal side of medicine. The subject line was 3 words. Number, temperature, signature. Special Agent Liv Malik called him back in 9 days, which Ivor later learned was extraordinarily fast, and which happened for a reason he did not know at the time. She was not what he expected. She was in her 40s, plainly dressed, and she asked questions in the flattest voice he had ever heard. And the flatness was not boredom. It was the deliberate removal of encouragement, so that a witness could not be led. They met in a conference room in a federal building in Denver, with a box of his documents on the table between them. You are the 3rd complaint about Arden Point in 2 years, she said. The other 2 were a former employee who would not give a name and a pharmacist in Aurora who thought their vile accountability logs looked strange. Neither gave me anything I could take to a prosecutor. She tapped the ledger. This is different. This is a set of shipments to an address that appears nowhere in the sponsor's list of registered sites, signed for by a named individual, on dates that match 12 emergency calls made by a child. Then you can arrest them, Ivor said. For what? Liv Malik said, without any cruelty at all. What I can prove today is that a company stored drug at an unregistered location and lied on some forms. That is a fine. Their lawyers will call it a documentation failure and pay it out of petty cash. What I need is a child in a bed with an investigational product in them and no valid consent, observed by a federal agent in real time. Ivor understood immediately and hated it. You need a Tuesday, he said. I need a Tuesday, she said. The second person Ivor had to convince was not law enforcement at all, and he was in some ways harder. Torrin Vasco was the clinical quality lead at Verint Pharmaceuticals, a compact, tired man who flew 400,000 miles a year auditing the sites that generated his company's data, and who had exactly one weapon, but it was a good one. A sponsor can trigger a for-cause audit of any research site with 24 hours notice, and the site is contractually obligated to open every door, every binder, every freezer, and every database in the building. Ivor drove to Denver and put the whole box in front of him. Vasco went through it for 2 hours without speaking, then took his glasses off and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. Do you know what happens to me if you are wrong? He said. I trigger a for cause on our flagship pediatric program 8 weeks before database lock, on the word of a suspended delivery driver, and I am unemployable forever. Yes, Ivor said. I have been living in exactly that for 5 years. And if you are right and I do nothing, Vasco said, mostly to himself. Then a sedative gets approved for children on a data set with fabricated subjects in it, Ivor said. And it works fine in 99 out of 100 kids. And in about 3 years, a 5-year-old gets it before a dental procedure, and her heart stops, and nobody ever knows why, because the signal that would have caught it was deleted in an apartment in Stannard, Colorado. Torrin Vasco put his glasses back on. I can have an audit team on the ground in 11 days. The third person was the one who mattered, and Ivor almost did not do it, because doing it meant using a child's voice as a weapon, and he had promised himself he would not. Merritt Quiroz got off shift at the Cottonwood site at 7:40 on a Thursday and walked to a hatchback in the back row of the lot, and Ivor was leaning on the car next to it with his hands where she could see them. I am not going to touch you, and I am not going to follow you, he said. I am going to say 2 sentences, and then I am going to walk away, and you will never see me again, if that is what you want. She stood absolutely still, with her keys through her fingers. You have signed for 19 shipments to an apartment, he said, and a 7-year-old called 911 12 times from that apartment because she could not get an adult to. Merritt Quiroz said nothing. Ivor held out the manila envelope. That is the transcripts, he said. Not a subpoena, not a threat, just what she said. Then he walked away. She sat in her car in the parking lot with the dome light on and read all 12, and he knew that because she told a federal jury about it 14 months later, and because when she got to call number 4, the one where a child explains that she cannot give her address because then they will not let her come back on Tuesday, Merritt Quiroz put her head on the steering wheel of a hatchback and stayed there for 20 minutes. She called the number on the envelope at 11 that night. I was 23 when they hired me, she said. I had $4,000 in loans and no license yet. They told me the wristbands were a data integrity practice. I want you to know that I believed that for about 6 weeks, and I have known better for 18 months, and there is no version of this where I am a good person. What do you need? The plan came together over 19 days, and it had 3 moving parts, and Liv Malik built it the way a person builds something they intend to survive a defense attorney. Part 1. The pull. Torrin Vasco's audit team would arrive unannounced at the Cottonwood site at 4 in the afternoon on Tuesday and begin a for-cause audit of the Somnus P2 pediatric arm. This would do 2 things. It would legally freeze the site's records against destruction, and it would drag Dr. Lamont Ossery, Stellan Ossery, and every senior person at Arden Point into a conference room on the other side of town for the entire evening. Part 2. The delivery. Northline Medical Logistics, whose general counsel took roughly 90 seconds to decide which side of this she wanted to be on, would reinstate Ivor Kaminsky and route one specific shipment of cadenzine to Arden Point Satellite 2 on Tuesday afternoon. The shipment would be real. The vials would be real. The temperature logger inside it would be a real logger, plus a second device, provided by the government, that reported its position and its seal state in real time. Part 3. The door. At 8:40 in the evening, the hour a child had chosen 12 times, federal agents and Stannard police officers would be at both entrances of the ground floor, east wing of Larkmore Court, and the fire door at the rear would be unlatched, because a 24-year-old study coordinator would have put a folded index card in the strike plate at 8:35. There was one part of the plan Ivor refused, and he refused it in a way that ended the discussion. Hallie would not be there. Liv Malik agreed instantly. "We are not using your daughter," she said. "We do not need her. We have 12 recordings of her doing the hardest part already. Except the court order said Tuesdays belonged to Rowena." Perpetua Kittredge solved it in a way that Ivor thought was the single most elegant act of lawyering he ever witnessed. She did not file an emergency motion, which would have tipped everyone. She simply filed a routine, unopposed request to swap the October and November holiday weekends, which shifted one Tuesday, and which Rowena's attorney signed off on without reading, because it was boring. Boring is the best camouflage there is. Ivor had learned that from the people he was hunting. On the Sunday before, Nevin Lattimore almost broke it. Merritt texted at 11 at night from a bathroom. He moved it. Tuesday is in 4C now, not 1E. He said the wellness suite is getting new flooring. Ivor read it and went cold, and then he read it again and started, for the first time in 4 months, to smile. Because 4C was Lucia Petrosek's apartment. Because Nevin Lattimore, who had a good face and a talent for making everything sound already agreed, had just moved a covert pediatric dosing operation into the home of the one mother in that building, who had already told Ivor Kaminsky everything, and had already signed a consent form of her own, the real kind, the kind a federal agent hands you. He forwarded the message to Liv Malik with 4 words. She said yes already. Tuesday came in cold and clear, the first real cold of the year, with the mountains west of Stannard gone hard and white against a sky the color of a gas flame. At 4:02 in the afternoon, a black rental sedan and a gray minivan pulled into the visitor spaces at 1200 Cottonwood Avenue, and 6 people in unremarkable business clothes walked into the lobby of Arden Point Clinical Research, carrying laptop bags. Torrin Vasco handed the receptionist a letter on Verint Pharmaceuticals stationery and asked for the principal investigator. Dr. Lamont Ossery came down in 11 minutes, smiling, hand out. By 5:30, the smile was gone, because a for-cause audit does not ask polite questions. It asks for the investigational product accountability log, and then it asks to physically count the vials, and then it asks why the count is short by 206. At 4:40, Ivor Kaminsky backed a white cargo van up to the dumpster enclosure behind the east wing of Larkmore Court. Nevin Lattimore came out to sign, because Merritt Quiros had told him she was tied up upstairs. He was in a fleece vest. He was in a good mood. He made a joke about the cold. And when Ivor came around the back of the van with the handheld, Nevin Lattimore's face did something Ivor would remember with great satisfaction for the rest of his life, which was nothing at all for about 2 full seconds. "They gave you your job back," he said. "Turns out the complaint did not hold up," Ivor said. "Sign here, please." And Nevin Lattimore, who had spent 4 months explaining to lawyers and judges and a family court evaluator that Ivor Kaminsky was an unstable obsessive with a grudge, stood in an alley in the cold and put his finger on a screen and drew his own name across it, in a fast, confident slash, at 4:43 in the afternoon, receiving one shipper containing 48 vials of an investigational sedative at an address that did not exist on any document ever filed with the United States government. Ivor tore off the receipt and handed it to him. "Number," he said. "Temperature. Signature." "What?" said Nevin. "Nothing," Ivor said. "Have a good night." He drove out of the lot at 4:46, turned right on Larkmore Drive, and parked one street over behind a landscaping trailer, where a woman in a gray coat was sitting in an unmarked car with a laptop showing a small blue dot that had just stopped moving inside a building footprint. At 8:35, an index card went into a strike plate on a fire door. At 8:41, Liv Malik knocked on the door of apartment 4C at Larkmore Court and announced herself, and when nobody opened it in 4 seconds, 2 agents went through the unlatched fire door at the end of the hall and opened it from the inside. There were 5 children in Lucia Petrosek's apartment. 3 of them lived in the building. 2 of them had been brought in a gray van from a neighborhood 11 miles away, from a family that had been recruited outside a laundromat with a flyer about a paid community sleep screening. They were on air mattresses on the floor of a living room. There was a folding table with a laptop, a plastic tray of vials with pale blue caps, a sharps container, and a stack of soft white wristbands. There was a nurse named Ilsa Prokop taking a blood pressure, and she sat down on the arm of the sofa when she saw the badges and did not get up again. And Ivo Petrosek was on the mattress nearest the window, 11 years old, with an oxygen saturation of 88% and a respiratory rate that made the paramedic who arrived 4 minutes later stop talking mid-sentence and start moving very fast. He had been dosed at 7:50. It was 8:42. He had been unresponsive for 52 minutes, and nobody in that room had written it down anywhere, because there was nowhere in the protocol for a subject who did not exist. Hallie Kaminsky was not in that building. She was 30 minutes away, at her father's kitchen table, doing a worksheet about the water cycle. But there was a girl in the hallway. She was 9, and she lived in 4F, and she had been the one Ivo told about the counting, and she was standing in the corridor in a coat over pajamas with a phone in her hand, because a 7-year-old had taught a 9-year-old the thing a father taught a 7-year-old on the edge of a bed. The call came into Pallant County Dispatch at 8:43 in the evening. The dispatcher who took it had 31 years on the console and had asked her supervisor, 6 weeks earlier, to flag any unregistered handset call from that building footprint straight to her, and had been told that was not really how the system worked, and had set up her own filter anyway. Lurleen Nunez put her hand flat on the desk when the tone came in. "Caller, there is a boy, and he will not wake up. I am calling for the girl who used to call. Dispatch. Honey, listen to me. Caller, please. Dispatch. We are already there. Do you hear me? We came. We are in the building right now." They found 411 pages in a binder on the folding table. They found a freezer in the wellness suite downstairs, with 206 vials that Arden Point's accountability log said had been destroyed. And in the locked drawer of the rolling cart, they found a sheet of soft white wristbands, pre-printed, ready to go, with subject numbers and surnames on them, dated for the Tuesdays of November, December, January, February, and March. 9 of them were for children who had never signed anything, because they were children. One of them said Thrale. H. Rowena was arrested in the stairwell between the 3rd and 4th floors at 8:51, carrying a laptop bag. She did not resist. She asked, twice, whether Hallie was in the building, and when they told her no, she sat down on the concrete step and cried. And Ivor, who was not there, would later read that in a report and feel absolutely nothing, and then feel bad about feeling nothing, and then get over it. Nevin Lattimore was arrested in the lobby at 8:54 with a cardboard box in his arms, containing 3-ring binders and the hard drive out of the front desk computer. Dr. Lamont Ossery was arrested at 10:20 at his home in the foothills, having left the audit at 7:15, saying he had a family commitment. Stellan Ossery was arrested at 11:40 at the Cottonwood site, where he had returned after the auditors left for the night, and where he was found by a standard patrol officer feeding documents into a shredder in a room with the lights off, which added a charge that carries 20 years and which his attorney would describe, memorably and uselessly, as a filing decision. Ivor Kaminsky found out it was over at 9:04 in the evening, when his phone lit up on his kitchen table with a text from a federal agent that said, "All 5 kids out. Ambulance for 1. It is done." He put the phone face down. Across the table, his daughter was labeling the parts of a cloud. "Dad," Hallie said, without looking up, "you are doing the breathing thing." "I know. Is it a bad breathing or a good breathing?" Ivor Kaminsky looked at the top of his daughter's head for a while. "Good," he said. "It is a good one." The case took 14 months to reach a courtroom, and it did not go the way the men in it expected, because they had spent their careers inside a system where paperwork was a shield. and they had never once considered what happens when somebody brings better paperwork. Dr. Lamont Ossery went to trial. His defense was that he was a physician and a scientist who had delegated business operations to his brother and recruitment to Mr. Lattimore, and that any irregularities in subject identification were the acts of subordinates. It survived until the government put up the temperature loggers. Ivor Kaminsky testified for 2 days about numbers, temperatures, and signatures. He explained to a jury of 12 adults what a chain of custody form is and why a machine that writes a number every 60 seconds cannot be argued with. He walked them through 22 shipments to an address that appeared nowhere in any filing Ardenpoint ever made, 19 of them signed by an employee, and 3 of them signed by Nevin Lattimore, one of those on the day of the raid, at 4:43 in the afternoon, in his own handwriting, for 48 vials he had no legal right to possess. Merit Quiroz testified for a day and a half and never once tried to make herself look better than she was. Torin Vasco testified about a vial count that was short by 206. Ozias Costas testified for 11 minutes about a plastic tub in a garage, and a court-ordered exhumation, and a toxicology report that found a metabolite of cadenzine in the femoral bone marrow of a 5-year-old girl who had officially never been within a mile of the study. And on the third afternoon, the government played 4 minutes of audio, 2 911 calls, 6 weeks apart, in the voices of 2 different children. Then they called Hallie Kaminsky, who was 8 by then, and who testified by closed-circuit video from a room with a therapy dog in it, and who was on the stand for 3 minutes and 11 seconds. The prosecutor asked her why she called. Hallie Kaminsky said, because somebody had to count how long he slept, and everybody in the room who was supposed to be counting was the same people who got paid. The jury was out for 5 hours. Lamont Ossery was convicted on 31 counts, including conspiracy, wire fraud, falsification of records, misbranding of a drug with intent to defraud, and the counts that mattered most to the sentencing judge, the ones involving the administration of an investigational substance to children without consent. He got 31 years. Stellan Ossery took a plea 11 days before trial and got 14. Nevin Lattimore, who had a good face right up until the end, got 19, and restitution he will never finish paying. Ilsa Prokop surrendered her nursing license and got 3. Dr. Rune Ostberg, who had described a bruise as unremarkable, without ever asking who drew the blood, was never charged and lost his license anyway, which in a town the size of Stannard was worse. Rowena Thrale pleaded guilty to conspiracy and to child abuse in the 2nd degree. She cooperated, and her cooperation was genuinely useful, and the judge gave her 7 years and said on the record that the court had read her allocution and did not believe the part where she said she had not understood. Her parental rights were terminated 8 months later. Verint Pharmaceuticals pulled the pediatric arm entirely, invalidated the dataset, self-reported to 3 regulators, and swallowed a loss north of $40 million, which their chief executive described in a shareholder letter as the least expensive thing we have ever done. And a rule came out of it. Not a law, not yet, but something that moves faster than a law. Verint, then 2 competitors, then the review board that had approved the protocol, adopted an independent verification standard for pediatric research. The identity of a child enrolled in a trial must be confirmed by a party who is not paid per completed visit. The fox no longer fills out the henhouse census. Inside the company it has a boring technical name. Around the office in Denver where Torin Vasco works, everybody calls it the Tuesday Rule. Ivor Kaminsky was offered his career back. The Cortland termination was reversed and expunged 11 weeks after the verdict, with a letter of apology signed by people who had not been there. 2 research organizations called him. One offered him a directorship. He said no to both. He still drives the van. He tells people it is because the money is fine and the hours suit a single father, and that is true, and it is not the reason. The reason is that somewhere on Interstate 25 at 5 in the morning, there is a white cargo van with a refrigeration unit behind the cab, and inside it there are boxes, and every one of those boxes has a number, a temperature, and a signature, and the man driving them is the only person in the entire supply chain who has already proven what he will do if one of them lies. He got full custody in the spring. Hallie is 9 now. She still counts things. The marble composition notebook is in an evidence archive in a federal courthouse, and she was given a new one. And the new one is mostly about a hamster. The Tuesday phone is in the drawer of her nightstand. It has no SIM card, and no plan, and no number, and she charges it on Monday nights, without being asked. Ivor has never told her to stop. So here is what I keep turning over about this one. We spend a lot of energy teaching kids to be scared of the wrong things. Strangers in vans, the dark. Meanwhile, the thing that actually got 5 children onto air mattresses in an apartment in Colorado was a brushed aluminum sign, a nurse in clean scrubs, a framed approval letter, and a man with a warm handshake who used the word community. Not one of those things is scary. Every one of those things is a costume. Then there is the question I would tattoo on the inside of my eyelids if I could. Ask who verifies, and then ask who pays them. Arden Point did not last 14 months because they were brilliant. They lasted because the organization that got paid per child was the same organization that confirmed which child it was. Whenever the checker and the beneficiary are the same body, you do not have a safeguard. You have a story about a safeguard. And Ivor did not win because he was angry. He was angry for 5 straight years, and it accomplished nothing except his own destruction. He won in the 4 months when he stopped shouting and started keeping a ledger. Rage is a flare. Records are a current. Flares are seen for a second. Currents move ships. Last thing, go teach a kid in your life that a dead phone can still call for help. Any old handset in a drawer, no plan, no service, will still reach a dispatcher. Charge it. Put it in a backpack. Tell them what it is for. It costs you nothing, and a 7-year-old with one made 12 calls that everybody dismissed, for a boy who was not even her friend, because somebody had to count. Be the person who counts. And if a room full of adults tells you the counting is somebody else's job, count louder. I am Nathan. Thanks for staying to the end.